leaders in our world by the Reverend Dr. Michael Beckwith. Jeffon is committed to shining a light of hope, peace, and power into every environment he enters. So without further ado, let's give a nice Ahavian welcome and love to Jeffon Seely.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. It is there's one incredible thing. Well, there's many incredible things, but one thing in particular that this time has allowed, and that is me to be able to sit here in California and communicate with all of you in the snap of a finger, though it's a little bit earlier. But I'm very grateful for this wonderful opportunity to be able to be here with each and every one of you. It's my hope as we go through this conversation here today, 8 hours, by the way, no, 20, 25 minutes or so, that you will grasp something that will help you illuminate the path as you continue forward. I've had this sacred opportunity to travel around the nation and work with people in a variety of capacities. And I don't know if any of you have get the Center for Spiritual Living's magazine, but just this month I had an opportunity to share some wonderful guides which aligned in such a way that I feel that I want to bring that message forward. So today, the conversation that I would like to have with us all is this beautiful message that we are all aligned with the divine. And I was thinking, well, what's the best way to begin to share this? And perhaps the greatest way for us to start is to simply ask ourselves the question, when is there a time when we are actually out of alignment with the divine? Because even when we believe that we may be outside of that sacred alignment, there is still an infinite essence that is enabling us to simply be here in this moment of now. So perhaps the barriers that are often created that prevent us from being around certain individuals or moving towards our dreams or having these particular thoughts that prevent us from recognizing our highest and best is when we forget that we are always empowered by the sacred essence of life. Now, just a little bit that I want to touch upon here very quickly is there is a wonderful insight that is popped up in my mind time and time again. I stumbled across this incredible community of Center for Spiritual Living when I moved to Atlanta, Georgia. I grew up in Salt Lake City, and I know some of you out there may be thinking when I say Salt Lake City, there's usually a question that automatically follows, and that is, are you Mormon, Jeffon? Growing up, I was, but I found that there's a very unique way that we can travel down this sacred path of life, and there are many ways up the mountain. So while I no longer obviously practice the Mormon religion, I still have family members that do, and I've recognized regardless of the path that we walk, we are all empowered by the same essence of life. But I stumbled into the Center for Spiritual Living in Atlanta about 6 years ago. And I thought there were a lot of churches in Salt Lake City where I was raised. But when I moved to Atlanta, I mean, there was a church on every corner. And I was driving around and just thinking, of all these churches, there has to be one that is spiritual in nature. I mean, that doesn't just say the same old thing. So I jumped on trusty Google. I don't know if any of you go there to try to solve life's most perplexing problems, but I jumped on Google and typed in, spiritual centers. And I wandered into the Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta and met my now mentor, Dr. David Alt. And it just struck a chord with me in such a way that I realized that this is what I was seeking. This is what I was looking for. And so as I've traveled down this particular spiritual path, there's been one incredible thing that has continued to pop up time and time again. You see, in this present moment, right where we are, in this infinite universe that we are all a part of, there are gases and minerals and elements that are combining and intertwining in such a divine and harmonious way that there are planets that are being formed. In this moment that we are resting in, that we find ourselves in, as we take in the sacred breath, there is a glorious sun that is shining down on this sacred earth that you and I have to call home, that is orbiting and spinning in such a manner that it enables all of us to simply move and exist in this experience. In this moment of now, there are rivers that are flowing, oceans that are ebbing, rising and falling. There is this infinite universe that is out here. And if we are willing to begin to recognize it, we see that there is a divine essence that is flowing throughout everything in the external world. but so too is there an infinite universe within ourselves. Our lungs that are breathing, our mind that is thinking, our blood that is flowing, our cells that are dividing, our atoms that are thriving. You see, the one thing that I've continued to recognize time and time again as I've traveled down this sacred path that I have to call this journey of life is the realization that from the furthest planet to the closest atom, there is one thing constant, and that is the divine is everywhere present. So what would happen if we were willing to recognize moment by moment, day by day, as we move throughout this journey of life, that every second, each snapping, passing moment is a gift from the divine, and we are filled with the divine? Well, that is what I would like to kind of direct ourselves as we move through this time here today. I feel that if we are willing to begin to recognize that, we tap into this part of us that can become this light in the dark. We can tap into this part that is always available within ourselves. Even in the apparent absence of the divine presence, the divine is there. We can tap into this space within ourselves and bring our light forth. So let's just imagine for a second, in this time that we find ourselves in, regardless of everything that is happening across the world, across the nation, in our communities, within organizations, wherever we happen to be, do you think that it is possible for us to begin to recognize at a deep fundamental level that there is a light that we bring with us? And if we are willing to shine that light, we can help illuminate the path for others. Do you think that that is a possibility? You can say yes in the chat. You can nod your head like this. And if you're nodding your head like this, it's okay. I recognize that as well. So this is something that I began to recognize at a very young age. And there's something that I feel at times we come out of alignment with the divine, though at a very deep fundamental level, there is no outside of alignment from the divine from my perspective, because what could be outside of the divine? If there is one essence and one power, as we often declare through our affirmative prayer, if there is one life and one power that is at the very depths of all things, then what could fall outside of that? Except for our minds at times failing to grasp and recognize that we are filled with this infinite nature, that we are filled with this divine presence. So even in the apparent absence of being aligned with the divine is still that very essence and fundamental basis, foundational level that we are building our experience on. So I asked you all, but this is a time for a quick reminder. Does anybody know where this place is? And you can type it in the chat, and if not, I just said it. This is my unique place where I had the opportunity to begin my adventures on this particular journey of life, and it's Salt Lake City. And why do I share that with you? Well, when I reflect back in my life, and I would dare to say many of you may have this same experience, there are times in our life where we may have failed to recognize or grasp the divine that is there. And I say this because my unique experience started there in Salt Lake City. My mother was adopted from Scotland, and my father is African American. And it's fascinating to think about all the circumstances that align with such precision to enable us to be. I mean, I think of my grandparents on my mom's side who were traveling with the Mormon church. My grandfather was helping to build churches in Scotland. My grandmother unable to have a child, and they wandered into this particular orphanage in Scotland. And something must have drew them towards this little girl at that time. And they went over there and they grabbed her and brought her back to America. And they obviously did that legally. They didn't just snatch and run, but they went over there and saw this little girl and brought her back here with the hopes that in doing so, they would provide her with an opportunity to expand her life and perhaps live in a greater capacity. And maybe at a fundamental level, recognizing that if this young girl happened to grow up and have children of her own, so too would they have fertile soil for which their life could unfold and blossom. And on the flip side of the spectrum, my father is African-American. My grandparents are from Mississippi and Arkansas. And I don't think I have to say anything to recognize the differences that those two sides of my family experienced based upon something that is external. And what I'm saying is external is the color of one's skin or the complexion. And having the opportunity to be in both worlds has provided me with a sacred blessing to be able to go into various spaces and share messages to hopefully build the bridges and help individuals recognize the oneness that we share. But nevertheless, so I was raised in Salt Lake City, and at the age of 5 or very early, my parents went their separate way. And at the age of 5, I really started spending a lot of time with my grandparents on my mother's side. And when I got to about 9 years old, I started recognizing things that often kids, I don't think they should have to see. And that is witnessing somebody who you love, my mother at that time, starting to slip down this very slippery slope of drugs and addiction and failing to recognize the light within herself. This is something that a lot of people deal with, but not everybody speaks of. And so my sisters and I were raised with my grandparents in a fairly nice area of Salt Lake. And in that community, my sisters and I were my sister and I were two of the only kids who had a different complexion of skin. And suddenly I started recognizing the way that people saw me started to determine the way that I saw myself. And what do I mean by this? Well, I remember teachers and people in our community, and even walking into Sunday school classrooms with discriminatory or derogative or just simply racist statements directed at my sister and I. And as a young boy, not knowing how to internalize it, I brought all of that within myself, and I actually used that to build the way that I saw me, my self-image. And the way that we see ourselves tends to dictate how the external world responds to us. So I was moving around with this idea that I wasn't as valuable, I wasn't as worthy, I did not matter, there was not an inherent essence or power within me. I was simply trying to fit into the mold that the outside world told me, or I believed told me that I was. And I carried this with me. I graduated high school, barely, reunited with my father in Seattle, where I went to college. And I share all of this, not so you can sit back and be like, maybe I can write Jeffon's biography after this, but more so to have you reflect back through your experience and recognize all of the things that we've brought or carried along with us that may not serve our highest and best, and what would happen if we could reframe our mind in such a way that we recognize that at all times, even in the apparent absence of the divine was there. So in Seattle, my father had a friend, and my father's friend was one of those individuals that is a spiritual guy. And I do this because I'm that type of person now to my friends, a spiritual individual. And maybe you've heard of these individuals, or maybe you might be one of these individuals. Somebody who says things like, there is no spot where God is not. Or one of his favorite lines, the divine order is everywhere present. And I remember him telling me these type of things and thinking of my experience up to that point. Here I was in my early 20s, and I remember him saying these things, and I remember pointing at all the things in my life where I believed that the divine was not there. My mother at that time entering into rehab for the 3rd time after many relapses. My grandparents in Salt Lake City who just passed away. My sisters who were still in Salt Lake and had nobody around them to really uphold them and help them recognize the uniqueness and the light that they were walking around with. And I thought that I made a pretty good point as to why the divine was not everywhere present and why everything was not in divine order. And then he handed me a book. And there's something magical about books. When you get a book, there's this incredible act that you can do. It's revolutionary if you try it. I'm sure you might have a book at home that you've yet to do this with. But the moment that you kind of open it up, I don't know if you've ever done that. You open it up, and then there's some words on there. And if you read the words, sometimes insights come to you that otherwise would just sit closed like this. So if you have a book, this is an action item that you can carry with you. If you have a book, if you're anything like me, that is sitting on your shelf, that you've yet to do that miraculous act of opening, I challenge you to do that this week, okay? So he gave me a book, and finally I had the courage to open it. Or maybe everything was preparing me up to that moment to begin to open it. And the book that I opened had a message that was profound. And I'm sure you've heard of this book. The book is called A Course in Miracles. And the first line that I read, first two lines, said, "The real cannot be threatened, and nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God." And it was at that moment that a divine doorway seemed to open within my consciousness. And I began to look back and recognize maybe there was a divine order to the way in which things were unfolding in my life. Maybe the seeming dark patches or moments of trials and tribulations were actually the very blessings that were helping me open, so to say, like a seed to begin to reach towards the light of my inner being. And I share all of this with you to encourage you to look back at your life, the abundant mountain peaks of joy and happiness and compassion and love and abundance, and the low, dark valleys of fear and despair, and recognize the one essence, the infinite intelligence, the divine presence that is always there. It has been with you throughout your entire experience. And if we can capture this from a deep, fundamental, conscious level, we recognize that everywhere we go, every step we take, regardless of the barriers that may be in front of us or the clear paths that direct us towards our dream, there is something internal that we can tap into that is empowering our every move, that is empowering our every thought, that is enabling us to move in such a way that we can remain in this type of ideation that I call divinely inspired. Divinely inspired. Because even in those particular situations where I felt as if I wasn't divinely inspired, there was still something at a fundamental level that was enabling me to be. After all, isn't that one of the basic fundamental truths that we discuss here at Science of Mind or Centers for Spiritual Living or New Thought? I mean, if we just think about an affirmative prayer, there is one essence in power that is everywhere. It is whole, it is complete, it is that which enables the earth to orbit in the infinite universe. It is that which is enabling the sun to shine down upon us. And we are one with that essence. There is nothing outside of that. But it is easy for our minds, being that our minds are so incredible, to look and recognize spaces where that is not, or we believe that is not the case. But perhaps we can begin to align with that in a way where we recognize that we can be divinely inspired as we move forward moment by moment by moment. So some may say, okay, Jeffon, this sounds interesting. You talked about there's one power and everything is all one. There's this golden thread from the furthest planet to the closest atom within you. You shared a little bit about your story. I mean, okay, we all have a story, but I mean, what can I do? Do you not see the current state of things at this moment? Do you not see the apparent division that is there within humanity? And this is something that I often say. Just because we recognize there is one power and essence and presence that is everywhere, that does not dismiss the fact that there are some of our fellow brothers and sisters and beings on this planet who are suffering and struggling in this moment. And it is not a mystical or spiritual thing to begin to bypass or dismiss the actual experience of people that we are sharing this planet with. Instead, perhaps we are called to recognize how we can embody the truth that we declare to be true and move forward in a way to begin to shift things in the outside world. So please do not take this as just this idea that, well, yeah, I can just sit back and declare that it's all one, and I don't have to talk about inequality or inequity or people who are struggling on this side of the world or on the other side of the world. Instead, let that be a something within us that sparks this realization, so to say, that allows us to recognize the gifts that we have and move forward in a way to create more peace, more harmony, and as we often say, a world that works for everybody. So coming back to this idea, well, how do I do that? Well, we walk around each and every day coloring this blank canvas that we have to call our life. Today, when we woke up, we were provided with this blank canvas that we can color any way that we would like. And you and I and everybody else has the opportunity to move around with these 4 paintbrushes. And we use these 4 paintbrushes, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, to assist in coloring what we call our reality or our experience. So what are these 4 paintbrushes? Well, first and foremost, something that we do each and every day, and that has to do with our thoughts. Our thoughts are that first paintbrush, or is that first paintbrush that we are using to assist in coloring our reality. Think about it for a moment. Nobody can jump within you and tell you what to think. Of course, there are external things that we can embody or embrace within ourselves, and it will influence how we think, but you are the thinker in your experience. Those thoughts then fuel emotions, which is the second brush, choices, which is the third, and actions, which is the fourth brush. So our thoughts, our emotions, our choices, and our actions are all things that are within our control, that we can use this divine energy that is within us to assist in coloring this canvas of our reality. But unfortunately, I know for me and maybe many other individuals at times, we do not recognize these paintbrushes, and we continue to recreate our reality time and time again based upon the things that we are carrying with us from the past. Similar to the story that I shared with you from my upbringing in Salt Lake. That's been coloring my experience for quite some time, but I can think a new thought, and that can transform the life that I am living. Simple in nature, but requires the work that nobody sees, and that's the work that takes place within. And perhaps one of the greatest ways that we can continue this going forward is to simply come back to center. And what do I mean by coming back to center? Where there are 2 natural occurring phenomenons that happen moment by moment that we can consciously connect to, that brings us back to this moment, that allows us to realize that we can think, choose, and act in a new way. And the first thing we can do to bring us back to center, something that you are doing now, and that is simply breathing, being conscious of the breath that you are breathing. Do you know that we take roughly 25,000 breaths a day? This year, we've had the chance to take roughly 8 million breaths. So how many of those breaths have you truly been attentive to? And I know some of you are like, well, I know during Kim's meditation, I was aware, I was breathing, I was conscious. Or some people may be like, well, I walked up the stairs the other day and oh man, I was aware of my breath there. But that's not what I'm talking about. Coming back to center and being conscious and attentive of the breath that you are breathing, that brings you to this moment of now. And the second naturally occurring phenomenon is that which is occurring right here, and that is your heart that is beating. Again, our heart beats roughly 100,000 times a day. That's roughly right now, being that it's November already. Yes, it is already mid-November. We have over nearly 30 million heartbeats that we've had the opportunity to experience this year. And how many of those have you been conscious, attentive, and aware of? And these are the things that bring us back to center. And there was a quote that I'll share with you, and then I'll kind of bring us to conclusion. I'm going to challenge you as you go throughout this week and you see things that you fail to see the divine within it. I'm going to challenge you to observe the space between your thoughts and then observe the observer. And what is the observer? Who is the observer? Has the observer been with you at all times? What is the part of you that enables you to think your thoughts for you? What is the part of you that empowers the thoughts that you think? Do you have the ability to choose one thought over another? And I would dare to say that that answer is yes. So as you continue throughout this week, this month, this year, and beyond, we've touched on a lot of things, but I'm just going to encourage you to recognize that even in the apparent absence of the divine is there. It is that which is enabling you to simply be in this moment of now, to recognize the glory and the power of your thoughts, to realize that you are the one who is assisting in co-creating the reality that you experience. And as we come together like we do in communities like this, we can use our energy in such a way to create something phenomenal. But it all takes place within here. So recognize the importance of your sacred inner world and realize that the light that you have to share with everybody who you share this planet with, that light that is dwelling at the depths of your being matters. I greatly appreciate your willingness to allow me to be here. I hope that we talk about a lot of things, but please do not continue to store up intellectual bricks of knowledge that you actually don't use to build anything incredible in your life. Instead, grasp some of these ideas from a meditation, from the books that you read, and be willing to practically apply those to your experience and be God in motion, be the divine in motion. You are already it, but we all can grow and expand in ways that is magical and transformative in nature. Many blessings to all of you. Please stay safe. Have a great holiday season. And I hope our paths cross, whether virtually like this again, or hopefully face to face. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jeffon.
Thank you.
Let's give Jeffon some love. Yeah.